Welcome to the Ultimate Landscape CEO podcast. My name is Mitch Katz, and I'll be hosting today's episode. My guest is Katie Magoon, founder and CEO of People Solutions Center. In this episode, Katie and I talk about the key HR milestones every growing company will face, from your first management hires to building a leadership team that can scale with your business. We also cover hiring, onboarding, culture building, delegation, and what it really takes to attract and retain top talent. Welcome, Katie. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Mitch.
I'll let you introduce yourself and tell us about your firm.
Sure. So I'm Katie Magoon. I'm the owner of People Solutions Center. We just celebrated our 10-year anniversary in business, so it's been an exciting year for that. We are an HR consulting firm that supports teams in a variety of industries, but quite honestly, our largest industry has been the landscape space, and we support them in all things HR. It can be everything from helping you in that important hire, being your HR department. Sometimes it's just that like really sticky HR employee relations situation you're trying to get through. And then we do a lot in leadership development and helping companies build great cultures through leadership.
10 years. Congrats.
I know. It's exciting.
That's awesome. So tell us about your career before People Solutions.
Yeah, so kind of a unique journey. I spent most of my career in corporate HR. So I finished my MBA in my mid-20s, so a long time ago, and went to work I was at Commerce Bank at the time, a local regional bank here in the Midwest, and had the opportunity to go to Progressive Insurance. So I spent a couple of years as an HR manager in their claims organization and traveled a lot to Missouri, Iowa, and Wisconsin, 3 great states, but a lot of snow. And then I had the opportunity to take what started as an 18-month rotation assignment. 12 years later, I was still in the recruiting division, and I was actually the director of recruiting for all of their claims and contact centers across the country, which is unique as an HR person because we spend a lot of time in HR helping other leaders lead, but to have to do it ourselves. And sort of, I always say it's like eating your own cooking. I had a team of, at our largest point, we had 75 recruiters on my team spread across the country. And so had to figure out how to go from coaching other people to be great leaders to doing it myself. And had been doing that for 12 years, loved it, loved the company, but ready for my next change, and particularly getting back to like my roots of true HR, less in recruiting, more on the HR side of the house. And decided that on a vacation, husband said, what's the dream job? And I said to own my own consulting firm. And 30 days later, I left Progressive Insurance after 15 years and started building a firm. So a huge change for me in terms of being in small business, but it's been great working with small to mid-sized companies and folks that are trying to get this right, but didn't have the resources to really understand what HR could do for them. And so we've built the business now. I have a team of 7 spread across the country.
So it's interesting. You went from helping other leaders and coaching other leaders to doing it yourself. I think that's an interesting dynamic. What was something that surprised you in that transition? It's like, oh, wow, this is a lot harder than it's when I was just telling other people to do it.
Yeah, there were a lot of things that for my first 18 months as a leader were really bumpy because I knew how to be really good at what I did on my own and to be a driver in that space. And there were 2 conversations that the individuals that I worked for at the time made a huge difference. One was one of my leaders sat me down after about 6 months of leading a team and said, Katie, you've gotten promoted to this level because you're phenomenal at what you do. But you go from A to Z in a heartbeat, and everybody else was still at maybe L or M. And if they're not following you, you're not going to get them where you need to go. Slow down, figure it out, and figure it out at somebody else's pace. So that was game changing for me. Quite honestly, I didn't know I went from A to Z that fast. So it was kind of news to me that I was getting there faster. So I needed to slow that roll. The second piece that was big for me actually came many years later. I had really been a manager of people and I was good at it. My teams were successful. We got a bunch of things done. Gentleman that is now a great mentor of mine came in and started leading the entire organization on the recruiting side and sat down and said, we're going to remove the word manager from our language and we are going to be leaders and coaches. And you're not a recruiting manager, you're not a manager, like everybody is a leader. And just that mindset shift and using that different language changed how I show up today as a leader and also how I teach others to lead. That it's amazing. One word can change your approach to things. And so and it's a lot more fun. So those two people, John and Jim are the two that I would say have made the biggest difference in how I coached and how I also show up as a leader.
Sounds like great mentors that you had there. And you said it's a lot more fun. I think what you meant was it's a lot more fun to be a coach than to be a manager.
Oh, absolutely. More fun for my team and definitely more fun for me. I am somebody, I drive for, I go for results. I go for, let's get from point A to point B the fastest way we can. And I used to get really impatient when everybody didn't see the world my way. And just learning to find how to connect with other people and recognize that other people are going to see it differently. And that's actually good for me, was probably one of the biggest differences.
So we could probably spend a lot of time on the coach versus manager topic, and maybe we will later on in our conversation. But before we get there, you also made a point in your prep that getting your MBA instead of another HR degree changed how you think. I'm curious if you could tell us more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of the reason I know this is because, again, back to my progressive days, I was sitting down with the Iowa state manager at the time, and I started asking him questions about his business, right? I started asking him about his profit and loss statements, and there was a big change coming through the organization at the time. And I asked him, what did he think that was going to mean to profitability? And in my mind, those were just natural questions. They impact what's going to happen with your people. And about 30 minutes into the conversation, he just gave me this really weird look and he goes, you're not like other HR people. Why are you asking me this? And I was like, this is the things I need to know to to help you do your business and carry that forward. All of that understanding of the business side of HR, not just the people side of HR, helps me every day when we're working with our clients. Most of my client conversations start from, what revenue size are you at? What lines of service are you doing? What are you trying to grow? And not because I'm going to tell them how to run their business, but all of those answers change what their people need and change how they need to structure things and what benefits we even need to be thinking about, or their comp structure. All of those things matter if you understand where they're trying to get in terms of the P&L. And to be honest, that's an unusual perspective in HR. Unfortunately, I just happen to have worked in a lot of places that the assumption in recruiting was you weren't just hiring people, you understood how to manage your own business that happened to be your department. And the MBA side of understanding that piece of it has been, I didn't realize at the time how significant it would be, but it's been huge.
You know, what you just said made something click in my head about how well we work together, because you understand that piece. And I think our clients, we spend a lot of time helping landscape business owners get clear on where they want to go, on their vision and the strategy to get there. And so I think when we send people to you and they are clear on that, they know, you ask them, hey, where are you at? Where do you want to go? What are these things? They have that because they've worked on that with us. And I think it makes it so you can hit the ground running a lot faster.
It definitely does. And also in working together for so long now, it's been almost 7 years now of working with your clients. So I know the kinds of things even that at different points you are telling them. So if they come back with, here's where I'm going and here's what my coach said, and I'm like, that seems a little off kilter. Let's talk that through. We can have the right conversations, but I also know how you all are coaching. So even things like, what are the roles, that you're expecting people to think about hiring for the first time at different levels? I know which things you all think are most important. So we're giving the same, we're reinforcing your message, never taking them off track from what their coach is telling them. We're just giving them another expert view of what does that actually look like, because they know the job title you told them. We understand what that talent actually looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking the same language, and that is super helpful. So, tell us about your journey into the landscape industry, because I don't think you started your People Solutions was not starting necessarily in the landscape industry. So, tell us about that journey into it and what you learned.
Yeah, not only did we not start there, if you had told me on the day I left Progressive that 10 years from now you'll have an HR company and a big portion of it will be supporting landscaping, I would have been like, that's a really weird business plan. I don't know what you're thinking. It actually happened through referrals. So I was at an event that I was sponsoring as an HR consulting firm through another coaching program, and had worked with a coach that didn't specialize in landscaping. They were just a more general coach. And through that, met a landscaping client. This is, I'm sure Blair won't care that I share, Blair from Element. I met him. We started doing work for Blair. And through that, after a couple of months of supporting Blair, we became their HR department and built up, first of all, did tons of hiring for them, but also supported them on the culture side, leadership development, all these pieces. And Blair said to me, I have somebody you need to meet. And he introduced me to Jeffrey. And Jeffrey and I started having just great conversations about the work we can do and how we can support your clients. And from there, Jeffrey started making introductions. And to be honest, everything else has been referral based in this group. While we sponsor things at the events and things like that, when you all have your peer group meetings, my phone starts ringing off the hook, either because somebody leaves the meeting and said, my peer group said I need to call you. Or on the flip side, I get the calls on the way to peer group of, I promised my peer group I was going to call you before my next meeting. You need to return my call before I land so that I don't get in trouble with my peer group. So
That's
it's literally just been referrals through that. And then certainly, especially in places where the coaches, you, Sean, and Jeffrey have had conversations with people and know their solutions. You all making those introductions for us has been big. So we've just grown the business through all of that and continue to love doing it. And it also allowed us to get really deep and understand the nuances. So our entire team is really well trained on understanding what this looks like and the challenges that the landscape businesses run into.
Well, shout out to Blair and Crystal. Great
Yes.
people. Great.
Yes.
And it's funny that you said that thing about clients on their way to peer group meetings, because peer groups are largely about accountability.
Yes.
When people come into groups, they're looking for somebody because they have nobody if they're at the top of the organization to hold them accountable. And so the group will hold them accountable, and nobody wants to be in a room with 15 other business owners saying they didn't get the thing done that they said that they would.
Yeah.
So definitely makes sense that they're calling you on their
more
on
than
their
a few phone calls where I can hear the airport announcements in the background of call me back. I take off in 30 minutes, but I have to be able to tell them that I had this conversation and I'm moving forward, which is great because, right, the peer groups are influencing, they're taking the things you all are teaching and they're holding each other accountable. But they're also great about sharing the resources in all of the different arenas, the resources that help them get there so that they don't have to do all of the work.
Yeah, so much sharing of resources. Now, let me just clarify. We want you taking action sooner than
Yes. Obviously, that's not ideal, but it's a good sign that the referral network works.
Yep. Sometimes it is what it is, right? So you got into the landscape industry. You've been working with the landscape industry for several years now. You've worked with landscaping companies in almost every state. I think you told me, or a majority of the states at least. What surprised you the most about the landscape industry?
Honestly, that they were willing to have conversations about HR, bigger than just payroll and picnics. And that's really the difference between us working with clients that are working with you all versus if I went out and just marketed to every landscape company out there. they really tend to view HR as just get the basics done, right? This group is trying to build a business that operates without them in the middle of it, that is compliant, that has a great culture, all of these things, right? The destination organization is a real thing, but it comes with needing the people strategy side of it. And so I've been amazed at how many owners we've met through this that really understand that vision and want to take this beyond just like, I'm making enough money for me and for my teams and I'm doing well, but they're really starting to think strategically about the HR side of things. And there's so much opportunity here to make through all of this HR work to actually make their life easier. But the openness to it and the excitement about it, particularly when we work with your clients, is drastically different than I would have.
That's amazing. And so what makes the landscape industry unique compared to some of the other industries that you work with, as it relates to HR?
Particularly in the years that I have worked with the landscape industry, the amount of growth that people are seeing is really unique. I have clients that, started at million and a half when we started working for them. And now they're at 3 million, 4 million. Some of them have gotten, now they're at 7 and 8 million in a relatively short period of time. And a lot of industries don't have that kind of growth in this compact of a space. And they had to adjust really quickly because the things you're solving at $1 million is very different than what you need at 7 or 8 million. And it's different than what it needs to look like at 10 or 12 million. And so the amount of adjustment that even a single company may need to go through from a people strategy side during that time period is, I think, has certainly in this recent history been something that's really unique to this industry. And it was across the board. Like everybody everywhere felt it in the landscape space if you were doing the right things.
I think that probably also ties into our community, again, being maybe slightly different even, right? Because those are companies that are coming into peer groups, coming into coaching and consulting, developing strategies for growth. And so they're growing probably even more rapidly.
Absolutely. The other thing that we see that's very different in this community than if I were out marketing just every landscape company out there, is the change in the talent pool and the change in what that talent pool needs dramatically different than even what what these groups thought of 7 years ago. As you all work with a company and start to put systems and processes in place and, implementing technology and things like that, it changes who can work on your team effectively and the expectations that owners have. And so there's been a big shift. At the same time, your talent pool in general, the talent pool in this industry got smaller. Add to it that we're now looking for some really specialized talent that not everybody who worked for other landscape companies come with. And all of a sudden you've gone through a huge change in how much talent is available out there and what that needs to look like. And that's at all levels. That's from crew all the way up to, hiring your first ever GM, hiring your first controller. Looks very different than what this industry would have thought of probably 10 years ago.
Yeah. And so the talent pool gets smaller because the skill set is greater, but the reward or the return on investment for those people is greater.
It is. They come in being able to, they come in with skill sets you wouldn't have had. And on top of it, they have skills and competencies and the ability to grow as your business grows. And so you're not, as you hire that higher tier talent, you're not outgrowing your talent as quickly as you are when you're first starting this growth path with the team you've always had. And that's not to say we want to get rid of all of the teams. We have to develop them and be patient with the people we have. But we also have to recognize that sometimes the infusion of talent from other places can accelerate that growth and be sustainable. But you have to hire the right people. You can't still hire the same level of talent you were hiring.
And I think that's a major shift that business owners need to make in that, when they were at that at that first level, right? Maybe the beginner level, they were making hiring decisions quicker. They're finding quote unquote talent, right? Maybe not the best talent, but they were filling a spot out of desperation or whatever the case is. And now we're teaching them to be more patient and look for the higher level talent for the better reward.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, perfect example. I have one of your clients who is hiring their first ever office manager role. And they're when we started talking about what does that look like, and I'm explaining that your first hire office manager looks different even than the person you're going to need as your second or third office manager down the road. It's a different skill set. And they've only known office assistant as the person who can answer a phone nicely and a person who can do data entry. And that job is so much more complex if you hire it correctly. But the hard part about it, that as an owner, is you've never seen unless you just stumbled upon your first hire and they happen to be the right talent. You've not necessarily seen what that can actually look like. So even if you're interviewing the pool of 10 people, they could be 10 great people, but they don't. And they might be 10 great people that would be great as your third office manager, but they might not be successful as your first because the skill sets are different. And so just even helping people recognize when you all say, go hire your first office manager, what does that mean? We've seen the success rate of we hired this person and this company and they're doing great and they allowed the owner to do the things that you all are telling them to do. We now have a blueprint for what that looks like in really all of the roles across landscaping. And that also comes with its challenge of it raises the bar for who you're looking for and the time it takes to find that person. But it, go slow to go fast, right? You got to slow down enough to get the right person versus just fill a seat.
Yeah, don't rush it. We'll talk about that a little bit later in our conversation too. But before we get there, I want to ask you, you mentioned in your prep that there are some key HR challenges that most landscape business owners run into at some key revenue milestones. Can you walk us through those stages?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start at sort of that first rung. Typically, the 1.5 million mark is a big turning point for a client. Under 1.5 million, they can kind of be all of the things. They're working a lot of hours to do it, but they're doing a lot of it themselves. They're often the salesperson, they might be the office manager, or maybe they've delegated that to somebody, but you're mostly managing crew members. But you start hitting this tipping point where you can't be all of the things and you need to start having those first roles. I've heard Jeffrey talk about it in terms of the three-legged stool, right? And this is what you all teach for your folks. You need, depending on the type of organization and the owner's skill sets, you need those first three critical hires, which tend to be office manager to get the owner out of that if there's nobody else that's taking that piece on. Their first sort of sales person to try to either take the owner out of sales or supplement the owner's sales so they can go over the top and get to that 2 million mark. And then the third hire, right, kind of depends on the rest of what else the organization is doing, but it's typically an operations type of role so that the owner isn't focused on Mr. Smith's project today, but they're able to look up and think about where do I need my business to be 3 months, 6 months down the road. They can have time to not make phone calls while they're getting on an airplane to get stuff done. So that's kind of that tipping point there. It's both the hiring of those people, but also now suddenly the leader needs to change how they lead, because they've always been the leader or the manager mostly of people that do something that they are the technical expert in doing, right? They know landscaping. They know how to tell somebody what to do. They even know how to be a coach to that person because they are the expert. Well, when you hire your first office manager, you might know how to pay the bills and how to get the money in, but you don't. There's so many other concepts that that role brings to the table that they may not know. So they suddenly have to teach people to do things either that they don't know how to do or that they've always been really good at, but can't explain to somebody else how to do it. So that's kind of that 1.5 million tipping point. The next piece, that wave rides you through most of your $2 million mark and feels pretty good. I'll be honest, that 1.3 to 1.6 mark is painful for most owners. They can have a lot of turnover because they hire people, but they don't know how to onboard them. Like there's just a lot of challenges to get over the 2 million mark. Get over 2, it starts feeling a little easier and a little bit more exciting and fun. Then you start approaching the 3 mark, and we again start seeing the organization's gone through a lot of changes. And the leader is now having to lead through other leaders. And that's the big change at 3 million. You're no longer the direct manager to everyone. You have to coach other leaders to be great leaders. And that's a whole different skill set and harder to do. You also have to be the willingness to delegate makes or breaks a company at 3 million. You can kind of fake it through the 2s if you're not great at delegating. You hit 3 million and can't delegate, and your life just got super hard. So that's kind of the big piece there. That's most of the shift. You also do start adding more roles like account manager, project managers, things like that. So role clarity at 3 million also starts to be important, because at 1.5 million, 2 million, everybody's kind of just picking up whatever they can. So you have anybody on your team that's outside of your crew, and sometimes even your crew, everybody's just doing whatever it takes. By 3 million, certainly by 3.5, suddenly like everybody just doing what it takes starts to either burn everybody out or frustrate everybody because balls start to drop. And so you've got to figure out, is Susie doing that work because that's Susie's job, or is that Susie doing work because Susie is wearing the hat of account manager, project manager, and operations manager? And so which hat should Susie actually wear, and how does it shift? So this is one of the parts where we start doing some like role definition of what is that job going to look like at your company. Then we get to, it gets to be,
Katie, before
what's that?
Well, before you go to the next level, I
Yeah.
was just thinking you were talking about that stage, that 1.5 to 3, and where you start to go from being the person that's really good at the role to having to coach people. I was just having this conversation with a coaching client a few weeks ago who is in that exact role, right? He the owner has been such a good account manager. Now he's got an account manager, right? And he's trying to manage that account manager. And we ended up telling him, I was working with one of our other coaches on this too, Sean Baxter, you know him. And we told him, you know what? You almost have to forget that you know how to be an account manager. And I was thinking about Men in Black, right? I was thinking about the Men in Black, the
Yeah.
neuralizer, where it makes them forget. I was like, that's what you need. You need like a poster of Agent K with the neuralizer in your office, reminding you that you almost need to forget that you know how to be a really good account manager. That way you can instead coach this new account manager, right? And coach him on not even necessarily on what it takes to be an account manager, but really just supporting that person, right? And believing that that person can be that great account manager that you have always been.
And recognizing that there's more than one way to do it, right? And that's that's critical in all of that. Like you said, the forgetting is huge. And the challenge that I actually tell folks all the time, it's actually easier to lead a team when you know nothing about what that team does than it is to be the leader of the thing that you are a subject matter expert on.
Yes.
Because otherwise you fall into this tell mentality. If somebody asks you a question, you tell them the answer because that's all you know to do. But right when we're in coach mode, you guys do this all the time. Somebody asks you a question and you ask one back and you make them get to their own conclusions. It's applying that same concept when you're leading your people and trusting people enough that even if they are not doing it the way you would do it, that doesn't mean that they're doing it wrong.
There's a great,
and that's a scary thing for a lot of business owners at this 1.5 to 2 million mark.
There's a great book on that concept called Turn Your Ship Around, or Turn the Ship Around, one or the other, right? And it's all about a captain of a submarine who knew nothing about the operation of the submarine and had to rely on everybody else, under him. So
yeah.
Really,
it's actually one of the pieces I tell folks all the time. It's probably the piece that I am most grateful for as a business owner was my experience in corporate space. There was no, you can't trust people, right? You didn't get to the level I got to if you couldn't be a good leader of people. And that meant you had to delegate things. That meant you had to get results through other people, not in spite of other people. And that ability, now that I'm a business owner and I watch so many other business owners struggle with that, I'm like, ooh, delegate that, get rid of that, move that over here. And it's easy for me, sometimes too easy, I'm sure my team would say, but that is one of the pieces that for somebody who's always owned their own business is the hardest piece for them to figure out at this stage. And I find, and I'm sure you all see it too, it's often the difference between a company getting stuck at the 1.5 million or going over the 2 into the 3.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So we're at the 3 million. Sorry, I cut you off there. We're at
No,
the
you're
3
good.
million. We're delegating. We're coaching other leaders to do the jobs. What's the next? What's that next?
Yeah. The next one has a little bit of a bigger gap, thankfully, right? Like you can kind of sail through 3 to 4 million pretty easily without major changes. You're probably mostly adding some roles, kind of taking hats off of people as you start getting into that space. At 5 million, there's another break, but I will say it's not as significant as the first 2 were. But you start to now at 5 million, you start to have to coach your leaders to also lead through other people. And so, right, it changes. So the leadership team that got you there might be great at leading a frontline team, but they don't have any idea how to coach another leader or develop people. And so it becomes a tipping point, less from an ownership perspective and more from a, have you prepared your team to lead in a different way? So this is where we start to see clients deciding to go externally for that, like for a little bit of a higher level role, probably not GM level yet, but director level roles, people who have led other leaders, comes into time there. They also start thinking about, how do I get leadership development for the rest of my team so that we're on the right path? The finance piece starts to make a difference here. I would say typically by the time they're at 7 or 8 million, the finance piece becomes a really big component of it. Some clients at 5 million, they need a little bit more. They might be stocking like a fractional CFO, something along those lines, fractional controller, because they do need to start. They're hopefully starting to get into job costing and understanding real-time profitability. But at 5 million, they probably don't need the controller yet. 7 million, they need to do some serious thinking about, this is no longer about money in and money out. And I've learned this from you all sharing with your clients, right? This is no longer about money in, money out. This is about somebody being strategic about your finances. And so it starts to shift that leadership team dramatically. And this is the moment it gets really scary for owners, because they have no idea how to lead a controller, right? They're like, I don't know that answer. And what's a KPI look like? And I laugh. Oftentimes somebody will call us and say, Mitch or Sean or Jeffrey, like, they said, call you and hire a controller. And I say, great. What are you hoping to get out of this? And they're like, they said to call you and hire a controller. So really just even learning, what does that mean? Also, at this 5 million mark, the role between 5 and 7 million, the role clarity becomes really important. This is where your owners have to not just delegate things, but they truly need other people to take full ownership of a department. So a division level manager, right, is actually not just getting today's work done, but they're setting strategy. They have ownership of their decisions. They don't have to check with the owner on every little thing. That also shifts the ability for an owner to think about, okay, am I the one who has to make this decision? And if they make a decision that's a little different than I might have, how do I not express that every time they make that decision, right? How do I not tell people I want them to be empowered to make decisions, but then smack them upside the head when they don't do it the way I would have done it? So we use a lot of RACI charts at that level. At about the 5 million mark, again, you have to kind of redo your whole responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed, because as an owner, what you want to be involved in should shift as you get to 5 and has to shift by the time you get to 7.
It's like the weight of decisions, right? The scale of decisions should shift as you get to that point. When you were smaller as the owner, you're making more decisions, but as you get into that 5 to 7 million, you want to be making less decisions as the owner and pushing more decisions down throughout the organization.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other piece, all of this is tied to your culture. And that's the piece that sometimes we don't, again, we start thinking business and everybody goes, oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. But they don't understand that the underlying piece of that is it is very different to build a great culture when there's, three or four people in the office that are doing things. And then you've got your crews and you've kind of got office and crew and they're separate. At especially once you start getting above that 3 million mark, and certainly by the time you're at 5, if your policies and your HR processes and all of those things are still crew office, you're never going to have an organization that can kind of take it to the next level. You need to start thinking of your policies as, what do we want our culture to feel like to be here? And if your crews aren't feeling like part of the bigger piece, you will, especially in this market, you won't be able to get to that next stage.
So what you're saying is, in a lot of companies, you see there be one culture in the field at the crew level and another culture be in the office or at the manager level. And that disconnect is going to create obviously tension between the two, which we see a lot of, but also prevent you from being able to scale beyond that
Yeah.
place.
Communication breaks down. Your turnover goes up dramatically if you have two different cultures for that. You almost always end up with higher turnover, or you're paying more money because you're trying to keep people, but compensation is your only tie to doing it. Also, at the point that you get to this, really anywhere between that 3 and 5 million mark, you need to start thinking about career pathing. And not just, a lot of folks will have a career ladder of like, here's how you go from, here's how you get 25 cents more an hour on crews. Now you need to start thinking about, though, how do you have your crews see that that's not just within crews, but like, how are you developing people so that your next account manager can be promoted internally? And it's not just technical skill based, but it's the what you do and the how you do it. And so again, everything about how you're coaching people and the tools you need from an HR side to support that shift, certainly by the time you hit 5 million. If you're trying to run 5 million with the same HR processes that you ran at 2 million, you're going to be in trouble.
And I think what you're also saying in there is that as you grow, one of the other major shifts you need to think about is building capacity into your managers to be able to grow. Right, as we get beyond that 5, 7, 10, 15, 20 million, your managers need to have that capacity to be able to sustain that kind of growth, coach the people underneath them, but there also needs to be a higher level strategy to grow those people as leaders, train backups for the various systems that need to be done and all those things, so that you can support growing up to that level.
Yeah. And this was where it gets a little challenging for business owners at this level, because especially if you've been fortunate enough to build most of this with internal hires up until now, maybe a couple of external people, different places. But a lot of the people on your team, they've never seen that work done at the higher level either. And so it's easy, like if I'm training a crew member, it's really easy to look at the senior crew member and be like, oh, they do that differently than I do. I should do it the way they do it. And we learn by watching other people. Well, as you move into leadership, a lot of our owners, they've never worked for another company. They certainly weren't at a leadership level at another company. And if they were, it was probably another business owner who had not had formal training. So they don't know what they're trying to emulate. And so they're just doing it the way, and some of them doing it very well, but it's kind of like brushing your teeth. You know how to do it. You don't know how to teach somebody else to do it. And so, and the folks on their team haven't necessarily, unless they came from one of the big corporate spaces, they haven't seen it done at that more strategic level either. And so they have a hard time thinking like, well, what are you talking about? Which is why bringing people to your programs like Growth Summit, and not just you as the owner, but bringing your team members so that they're hearing the same language and concepts that you're trying to talk about. They get to see a company who's already gotten to that level. Now they go, oh, that's what you've been talking about. And now it makes a huge difference in what they do.
And I think that's also the benefit of bringing in people from when you're investing in leaders, investing in a higher level leader than you're used to, somebody that's done or operated at that level, even outside of the industry, right? Bringing somebody in from outside the industry at a higher level, director level or something like that, that really can bring you to that next level, that can show you as the owner, because you've never seen it yourself maybe, and the rest of your team, what it actually looks like to operate at that level.
Yeah. I just had that happen in a way that wasn't what we would hope for. We had a client that was looking to make a hire, and they had found somebody local who had, knew somebody who knew somebody. And they're like, Katie, they've owned their own business and they're great. They already know how to do this. They can come be my director of operations. And I said, before you make that hire, let me talk to them and see, because as an owner, you're only comparing to the candidate pool you've known. So the candidate turned out to be a great person, would have been a great culture fit. The problem was this business was a $5 million business. The largest his company had ever gotten was about $1.2 million. So he hadn't gone through any of those like needs for systems, needs for processes that you go through along the way. And so he was a great director of operations if wing it and do it by the seat of your pants was what you were looking for, but he wasn't going to bring that. Like, he hadn't already done this somewhere else the way they were, and they were miles ahead of where he was. And I had to have that conversation. I was like, great person, but you need somebody who's already done it this way, not bring somebody, especially at those higher level jobs. If you bring somebody in who hasn't seen it and done it, nobody else is going to catch on as to like where you're trying to head.
Related to what you just said too about, knowing somebody, them being in your network. I also had a client recently who was looking for or thinking about a GM role for a long time, knew somebody in his network, and went through a series of interviews with this one person and said, hey, we're going to hire him, right? But we talked about, hey, before we do that, let's actually put a search out and compare this person to others, because just looking at one person, you don't know what you're comparing to. So I always recommend clients that even if you know somebody, family, friend, or somebody you've worked with in the past, if you're going to hire somebody for that role, at least put a search out there and compare to what else is out there before you make the decision on that one person.
Yeah. And there's that's great advice. And there's a lot of reasons for it. But one of them is just a key concept that we teach in interviewing skills, right? We all have filters, and we take in information with those filters on, right? And when we know somebody from our network, or we know somebody introduced us to somebody, we immediately, trust is contagious. So if I trust you and you trusted this other person, I go into that interview with this filter that this person's great. And guess what? I don't ask all of the questions I would ask somebody I didn't know. I listen to their answers, but through a filter of, but I'm sure they're great. And information doesn't sink in the same way, or I don't push for that extra example in my interview process. So if we're only interviewing the one person, like, unless the person just says something really crazy, we're very unlikely to find the reason not to hire them. And that's a dangerous spot, especially at that GM level. If you get that hire wrong, it has a ripple effect in a lot of different ways.
I want to go back to that 5 to 7 million range where you're talking about a controller, because I think a key aspect to that too is the type of business, meaning some types of businesses, high maintenance, are going to be higher transaction. And so there might be a bigger need there. And also it's going to depend on the software. The better you have your software dialed in, the less need you have for somebody to organize that data. But if you don't have that software and you don't have your data organized, then you need somebody to organize the data and analyze it for you.
Yeah. I have had conversations with some of the software companies that you all, have a lot of your clients on, LMN and Aspire and all of those that do a lot of things. And I tell folks, if you are trying to implement, particularly if you're taking the leap all the way to Aspire, trying to do that without a controller for most clients is really hard. And it's not that the software is hard, it's that your data has to be really clean. And many companies, it is clean of like their P&L is clean, but this is data. I always talk about a controller isn't just about the accounting side. A controller is looking at all of the numbers that have to do with your business and making them work in a way that they set you up to make strategic decisions based on data. And so a great controller isn't going to just be about, oh, look, our P&L is done by the 5th of the month. Congratulations. They can actually look at data around KPIs or look at a problem that has nothing to do with what people think of as traditional accounting, but they give that analytical lens to it and have you see something that you've been overlooking. But if you don't set up that software right from the beginning, either of them, you're going to be you're just going to struggle with it the entire way. And you're not going to get the bang for the buck out of the software that you need.
I totally agree with you. So did we hit the major milestones that you were?
I think we did. I think those are right. The next big milestone, and that can really, this one can vary based on revenue side. It's really more about what role does the owner want to play, is when do you bring in, what does your senior leadership, when do you start building a truly strategic leadership team? And is that strategic leadership team, division managers in each of the divisions, or is it a second in command? This person's going to take it all. And that really depends on your exit strategy. So, and what role you want to play day to day as an owner. So those are the big ones in terms of those milestones. The other places start along the way. It's somewhat about how you're going to grow. Is your growth organic from your own lines of service, or are you getting into M&A? And M&A, I always laugh when you're doing mergers or acquisitions, the last seat that people think to put at the table is HR. And it's actually one of the most important. And people put it in, they bring HR to the table on closing day, and you're way too late. You need HR as soon as you sign that letter of intent and start due diligence. There's HR things you need to be thinking about and asking about to avoid some pretty big challenges during the acquisition.
And that makes a lot of sense, because one of the biggest reasons for failures of mergers and acquisitions, I think, is misalignment of culture. And so if you have two very different cultures that you're trying to merge together, that creates a lot of tension, a lot of things to manage. And so having HR to be able to bring those together, well, first make sure that they even align and that it makes sense, right? And then once you do, to bring them together, that makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah. And also understanding, like, when you buy a company, somebody will say, oh, John is our key person, and we're going to make sure John stays on for 2 years. Well, John may not have the skill set of the people that you have brought in, so that can matter. Also, there's tons of compliance things you need to check for that you may not even have checked for in your own company, but you need to check on the new company. And they're just questions that people don't think to ask around, like, even what benefits do they offer? How much vacation do they offer? As you're trying to merge those two together, there's a real bottom line cost difference. If this company has always offered 3 weeks of vacation and you've never even come close to that, but you don't calculate that into the cost of making the transition, people get shell shocked on the back end. And then they're like, well, that's okay. I'll just cut their old vacation policy. I'm like, yeah, good luck with that. Let's see how that one turns out for you.
Yeah, that does not sound like a good strategy. So let's talk about hiring, Katie, because this is a big thing that so many people are struggling with, to find the right talent. So before we even get into what it takes to find the right talent, let's just talk about the cost of getting it wrong. What do you think the cost is of getting a hire wrong?
On average, most of like the Society for Human Resource Management posts this number all of the time. Most people would tell you it's anywhere, depending on the level of role, it could easily be $15,000 to $20,000 right off the bat. The higher the level role, especially depending on how long you let it go, if you got it wrong, that number can get to be at least 40 to 50% of their first year salary pretty quickly.
So what are some keys to getting it right?
The number one thing that we find for getting it right is first making sure you've defined the role the right way. The number of times that clients call and say, I want to hire an account manager. And we start asking questions about, well, what will this person do? And we get this like kind of weird look like, I thought you guys know landscaping. Why don't you know what an account manager does? Owners often don't realize we've actually built out four to five, depending on how loosely you define them, avatars, our team calls them, of the different types of account manager roles that exist across landscaping. And different roles make sense in different organizations. But if we don't ask those right questions, we're going to end up hiring somebody that would be great for Avatar John, but they're going to fail for Avatar Susie in a big way. And that's it all. I mean, there's 4 to 5 account manager versions. There's easily 4 different project manager versions. And thankfully, from working with your clients for all of these years, and more importantly, from talking to you all as coaches, we've really learned what those avatars look like, and when you're the kind of advice you're giving people around which version are they really looking for. So we know the questions to ask your clients to say, all right, so tell me what Mitch said about what do they want here? And then they go, oh, well, Mitch said blah, blah, and they wouldn't have thought to tell us that. But the role definition is really important. So when we think about role definition, we don't just go with here's the list of the 100 things we want somebody to do. It's really about coming up with what are the 5 big bucket priority areas that role will be responsible for. And the most important part, about what percentage of time do you think the person will spend doing that? So, right, a role that is an account manager role that is 10% sale of new maintenance clients is very different than a role that is 60% sales of new maintenance client. And the talent you need to be successful, completely different. So that's where we start, is let's make sure we're all talking about the same thing. Just because we're using the same job title, that can get really weird. Then we go the next step, which is really understanding then, not just what do you want this person to do it, but how do you want them to do it? Because that also can vary based on your culture, based on the kind of right, you said, I was just having a conversation with a client yesterday about a project manager role. And he was talking about how much their role had shifted over the years, because historically they would do maybe 6 or 7 projects at a time, but every project was, $100,000 to $200,000, right? So they only have a handful. Well, now they've sort of shifted their mix of business, and they're taking on a lot more smaller ones, and they have fewer huge projects. So now at any given time, somebody is managing 17 to 20 projects. That's a different skill set. So we've got to think about that. So getting the how do you want somebody to do it? What do you want in leadership roles? Do you want somebody who's truly just a manager, or do you need them to be a leader or a coach? And are they going to lead other people? So the how becomes a key part of that. Then we have to make sure that, right, actually how to have the interview. We're going to do, we always do first round, so that you don't talk to people you're going to fall in love with, but shouldn't. Using a comment out of Blair's book, when I first met Blair, he said to me, Katie, I'm known for falling in love with a tree frog. And I was like, I don't know what a tree frog is, but I don't think you should fall in love with them. So sometimes it's just protecting owners from just falling in love with great people, but who don't have the talent they need for that role.
I think tree frogs are people like ourselves. Maybe that's what Blair meant.
Yeah.
People, tend to fall in love with people that are like them.
Yes.
And that might not be what the organization needs.
Yeah. And if we tend to be somebody who just sees the good in everybody, that's a huge benefit in life. But also it's really easy to love every candidate and not know what questions did I ask that tell me not just were they a nice person, but how do I know they're going to be able to do this job? And so that's the next piece, is just making sure you're well trained in behavioral based interviewing, not just to ask the question, but to understand what was I actually listening for, and how do I use that answer to make a decision, which is what gets us past all of those filters that we run into that, can steer us awry along the way. So And then the other piece that, quite honestly, even beyond, there's two pieces that make a huge difference with long-term success that we see a lot when businesses are starting to hire differently. Right? We get really quickly caught up in, well, they were a bad hire. It might not have been a bad hire. We might not have been ready for them as a hire, right? We might not have, did we create a candidate experience that has them excited to join the company? Because if you call me back promptly after the interview, if you tell me what's next, if you're like, make me feel wanted during the interview, then when you make me the offer, I'm excited to walk in the door. So if things are bumpy the first week, I might not even notice. On the flip side, if you waited 3 weeks to call me after the interview process, I'm sort of like, I need a job. I'll take it, but let's see where this goes. Now it gets bumpy and the next person calls me, I go take the other job. So candidate experience is huge, and sad to say, the easiest thing for most clients to fix in candidate experience is actually just giving people an answer to their interview. And even if you're like clients that use us, right? We make it so easy to just tell us yes or no, and we'll call the person, and they still 2 or 3 weeks later, we can't get an answer to tell them. And if you say yes, then probably either not going to get them or they're not going to stay when you do. And then it brings us to the onboarding piece. You've got to have, you can't just throw people in and be like, well, you did this somewhere else, figure it out here. People need relationships built. They need to have friends at work. The Gallup poll talks about that all of the time. And you have to trust them and step in as their leader and coach. It has to be more than just go do the job.
So how can we know if someone is actually capable of doing the job? Like, how do you figure that out in the interview?
Yeah. Our approach to it is, first of all, right, getting really clear for what you're looking for on the front end helps dramatically in your interviews. We teach a lot around behavioral based interviewing. This is that concept of tell me about a time when, which I will tell you, most people, when they hear that, they start to roll their eyes because they're like, oh, I hate that approach. And they hate it because they don't know why they're asking for those examples. But the whole concept is past behavior predicts future behavior. So if you can tell me how you did something in the past, then I can see like, okay, well, here's how I would want you to do it here. Does that naturally align? And so you have to ask the examples, and then you have to ask lots of really good follow-up questions and dive deep. You've got to, I say, it's like going through a conversation and picking up people's stories and putting them in your basket. You're trying to fill your basket with stories that they told you, not stories you told yourself, but stories the candidate told you that tell you whether or not they've done the job and that they would do it the way you want it.
How do you weed out the people that are really good at interviewing and not necessarily good at doing the job?
Yeah. Couple of things. One, you've got to get better at interviewing. So you've got to train yourself here, right? We've all been to the like, oh, somebody told me once how to do this, but you need to practice this and you have to get good at it. The other piece is using tools that are out there. Our assessments make a big difference here, different assessments for different roles, but understanding the role of assessments, using other sources so that you're not the only person making that decision, right? The more people, I always say, like, I've hired a ton of controllers in my career. I can tell whether a controller knows the right words to say or the controller can actually do the controller role. And that's going to look different for a first-time controller or the fifth controller that a company has had. So not trying to be the expert in all of the things that you do and having other opinions of things, I think is huge. But also the most important thing, know what you're looking for. And then at the end of the interview, go back and ask yourself, we said they need to be good at delegation, great at communication, right? Like these key criteria. Don't just walk away with this warm, fuzzy feeling at the end of the interview and go, oh yeah, they were nice, let's hire them. Go back to those 5 criteria you set and evaluate where are they at on those 5 things. Oftentimes they have great interviews, but they're not qualified to do the job.
Are there strategies that you recommend to see if the candidate can actually do certain portions of the job, like a skills test of sorts?
Yeah, depends on the role. And you do have to be a little careful on this because a lot of times clients will make up their own versions here. And that can create, if not done appropriately, it can create some legal risk for you. And more importantly, you have to make sure that from a candidate experience, it doesn't get weird. I just had a client that kind of, before they worked with us, had a process where that they had implemented, and it created, the only people who went through the process were people that didn't cringe at having to do that step in it. And so, but all the people that were willing to do that, I was like, they're great people. They are not going to fit your culture, because everybody who would fit your culture would have cringed at doing what you asked them to do. So sometimes there can be simulations. Job shadowing can, like, coming out and like riding along with somebody for a couple of hours can be helpful so that they're making the right decision too. You want to be open and honest about, this is what it's like to work here, because if they know that up front, they're willing to be pretty open about, I'm going to hate it there. If they don't, they take the job and then they're like, wow, if you told me that, I never would have accepted it. You're better off if they can tell you. So some of it is just giving them the chance to talk to somebody about day in the life, thinking about how you're going to talk to them about the job. Sometimes ride-alongs, in certain situations, ride-alongs can be helpful. Controller level and GM level roles, we have done actually some simulation around, especially when we need them to like pick apart a P&L and really understand what that's like, come up with recommendations. We can do some simulations around those types of things. You can do some of those in an account manager role for sales, right? Sell me these things. Just make sure you set it up correctly so that you don't end up with legal issues or just weirdness in an interview.
Oh, key takeaway: don't make the interview weird.
Yeah. Oh, you'd be surprised at the stories for somebody who's been in recruiting for 30 years of her life. I've got some interesting ones.
I bet. Maybe you'll tell me some of those after this interview.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about culture early on in the discussion. We talked about being strategic about it. What happens when you're not strategic about building culture?
I tell people all the time, every business has a culture. The question is it the one you wanted or just the one you ended up with? Right? You have to sit back and say, what do I want it to feel like to work here? And 90% of the time, as business owners, especially right up to that $3 million mark, we're just trying to keep the water level below the eyeballs and get the work done. It's hard to have time to think about what do you want it to feel like. But once you define that, it shifts everything, and it has to align with what you want your customers to feel like when they work with you. Because if there's a disconnect of, I had this happen where a client said, our customers are number one. We want our customers to feel like they get white glove service every time they show up here. But back at the office, somebody made a mistake. They got yelled at. Nobody ever said thank you. They didn't have any benefits in place to reward their people, and they paid their people at the absolute bare minimum you possibly could. You're never going to deliver on great customer service if, when your employees walk in the door, they're not treated great. Like, that just isn't going to happen. And so you really have to think about, what do you want your client to experience? What do you want your people to feel like? And what resources do they need, down to sick days and holidays and things, to be at their best to do that? And I think that's often the part of things that people go, well, you get a paycheck. Isn't that enough? And it's like, no, it's not if you want to build the destination company.
So for a company that's ignored culture for too long, where do you recommend they begin to get back on track?
The first thing you have to do is kind of just step back and acknowledge that that's where you've been, and work with yourself and self-reflect, and then also work with your team to very openly say, you know what, we have a culture. I'm not sure it's the one we want. So let's envision, what do we want that culture to feel like in the future? So, right, we've done all the work, we've accomplished it. It's 5 years from now. What do we want it to feel like? And you have to be, as an owner, not only be aligned with what that is, but you have to be willing to make changes to make that happen. You have to recognize, if you've never paid attention to it before, for some companies, it's minor shifts, right? They're doing most of it right naturally. They just hadn't put thought to it. Other times, this is a completely different, sometimes it's an org structure change of maybe the owner isn't the person that should be interacting with people every day. Other times it's pulling, maybe the owner is great at the people side, but they're getting so pulled into the day-to-day operations that they can't be the inspirational leader that they would like to be. And so thinking about it from a structure perspective, the HR policies and processes perspective, all of that needs to be thought through. You'd be amazed at even just how a change of your vacation policy can impact your culture in a positive way with just little minute changes that don't cost you any more money, but it sets a tone.
I found that many times there's a culture that the owner believes exists, and then there's the culture that everyone else knows exists.
Yeah.
And so for the owners that might be blind to the culture that actually exists and might not be the one that they want, what are some red flags that they can start looking for that would tell them, oh, wow, maybe this isn't quite what I thought it was?
One of the biggest ones is you leave meetings and no one's taking ownership of the things that they thought would be done. The other piece that I notice, or you leave meetings and you've asked for feedback and nobody answers you, right? You're trying, and sometimes very intentionally, like, I want your feedback. And everybody's crickets. That's usually a sign that there's something else simmering just below that. Attendance problems become usually a sign of a culture issue. Other things that, just not being able to trying to change processes, but nobody's really buying into the process changes. You can't get new things adopted. The biggest one is gossip. When you start noticing that everybody's going like, well, so-and-so did this and so-and-so did that, and these people are like standing in the corner and whispering, you have a culture problem. And that's a sign that, and even if everybody's coming to you with the gossip, the fact that they're willing to gossip about each other is a sign that their trust isn't high enough. And so that's the challenge. They have to trust you as a leader, but more importantly, they also have to trust one another, or else your culture will break, even if you're doing everything right.
So what besides hiring mistakes and poor culture are human resource blind spots that are costing landscaping companies time and money every year?
Yeah, absolutely. So this one changes a little bit year to year, always. And there are a lot of, compliance is one of those things that are key. Two things that I would point to. One is benefits related, and the other two is a compliance issue related to I-9s. That's a new trend and issue. I'll tackle the benefits piece first, because this is one of the places where we see owners sort of cutting off their nose to spite their face. They don't have health insurance in place because they're like, oh, I can't afford that yet. The problem is you can't get the talent level you need if you don't have a basic health plan in place. You just automatically from the beginning, even if you're offering stipends and things like that, if you do not have a health insurance plan in place, your talent pool goes from here to here really quickly. So you just have to figure this out. And the great news is there are a million different ways to solve for this. Quite honestly, owners get it in their head more than anything of, I can't afford this. And we're like, you can't afford not to. Let's just get smart about how you're going to do it. But they get in their own way. It's usually cheaper than they expect it to be. So that's one of them. The second one is a newer trend that is around I-9 forms. And I know everybody recognizes all the importance of your I-9 forms and making sure that we're hiring individuals that are legally authorized to work here in the US. But the shift that happened this year is historically with I-9 forms, if somebody came in, they came in and audited your I-9 forms, and maybe you have them all in place and everybody that's working there is legally authorized to work there, but maybe your employees didn't fill it in. Your employee has to fill in the form on day one. Everything else has to be filled out by day 3. And maybe you missed those deadlines, or you put a signature in the wrong place, or somebody didn't sign the translator's box, whatever it happens to be. Under the old world, as long as it was more clerical errors, you had kind of a 10-day grace period to fix those. And you could fix them and not end up with fines. They've gotten rid of that policy. So now every one of those clerical errors, even if you hired people that are completely eligible to work here, every one of those clerical errors cost you money. And the fees can range from $250 to $2,500 per instance. So if I've got 30 employees and I make the same mistake on 10 of them, I'm going to pay for I'm going to have 10 fines just for that one mistake. So we just got back from the National Society for Human Resource Management conference. And for the first time ever, like every round of breakout sessions had some session on I-9 forms. I was like, what is going on? And most of the attorneys said that particularly in small businesses, most companies, and especially in landscape construction industries like that, most companies have about a $10,000 to $15,000 risk sitting out there on I-9 forms that they don't even know exist.
It's a big risk.
It's a big risk. Most of us don't have that just sitting. Even if we had it sitting around somewhere, that's not how we want to spend it. So making sure we get that right has become really important in this new world.
Katie, thanks so much for sharing everything you've shared today. For people that want to get in touch with you for one of your services, what is the best way to do that?
Absolutely. People can reach us through our website, peoplesolutioncenter.com, or they can send us an email at hr@peoplesolutioncenter.com. We would love to talk to them, learn about their business, and help figure out how to make their people strategies work.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katie.
Thank you.